Hello bookworms, welcome to the Weekend Readers Book Club. Thank you for joining us. In this episode we are discussing the 416-page novel, book, romance, love finding, I don't know what genre to put this book in, the 416-page Book of Happiness. That is a 2002 released Summer Island by Kristin Hannah. Now this book I selected on a whim. I read the back page blurb and it interested me a little bit. It didn't tickle my fancy too much, but I was like, I'll give this book a whirl, and boy oh boy was I glad that I did. This book was amazing. This book features around one main character, which is the mum, Nora. And it goes into the relationship details on on what has happened in the past and what she can do to help move forward to try and rekindle her relationship with her two daughters, Ruby and Caroline. In addition to that, Ruby has a hard choice to make because Nora has had something exposed in the newspapers about her. And the newspapers are now looking for a tell-all expose. And Ruby, the daughter that hasn't had a relationship with her mum in some time, said, yes please, I'll take the money and I'll write it. This book goes into a lot of depth in relation to Nora, Ruby and Caroline's relationships, and also the sisters' relationships between Ruby and Caroline. We also find out that Ruby has a a high school sweetheart who comes back into the fold, Dean. And the overall arc of this book, which was surprising, is that Dean's brother Eric, who is sick and who is dying, slowly brings everybody back together as he appreciates the fact that family is family and time isn't always on your side. What got me into this book to start with, on the back page blurb, it had the fact that Ruby had to write a, expose on her mum. And I was like, okay, that would be interesting. And for the first probably quarter of the book, that is somewhat the focal point of the story. Then the story changes and it develops into something a lot more greater. And the expose newspaper article that's to be written somewhat goes on the back burner as everybody tries to find their place in this world and tries to forgive, not so much forget, but learn to live, love and enjoy one another. This book was highly entertaining. It was a great read and it was an easy read too. I found myself not being able to put this book down. And I also found that I'm going to admit it, I shed some tears through this book because this book does pull on your heartstrings and your emotion because it taps into yourself, where I found myself self-reflecting, going, wow, how are my relationships with my family and a circle of friends? How is that to me, and do they see that reciprocated on the same level as I do? It's a very interesting read, and I would suggest go out and have a read of this book if you haven't already. If you are looking and interested to actually purchase this book, we actually have 2 links in our episode bio that you can actually click on to find this book on Amazon and the Book Depository. It's just a quick link to them, and you feel free to go through and pick up this book. This book now actually resides on my bookshelf. It was so good that I actually made a space on my bookshelf, and it has now joined the likes of, it's going right next to Watermelon by Marianne Keyes, because it's that type of book. It's the book to help you a little bit self-reflect, but also understand that overall, love conquers all, family is important, and time isn't always on your side. There are 2 things I'd like to change about this book though. it's not a biggie. They're not biggies in the scheme of things. But I would like to change the last chapter. I didn't enjoy the last chapter. Well, I did, but it wasn't the last chapter that I was looking for. The last chapter ends with a wedding. And you're like, awesome. So-and-so and so-and-so gets married. Again, I'm not going to go into the details. You need to read the book to figure out who actually gets married to what and whom, and yeah. But it ends with a wedding. And I'm like, that's awesome. However, I wanted it to end 3, 6, 12 months in the future to be able to actually see how these individual characters have grown separately, together, or how they've actually moved on with their lives after the events of what's covered off in this book. That's all I was looking for, just an alternative ending, but everybody's different. You may read this book and go, the ending was fantastic, and that's great, because that's for you. I read how I want to read, and I will feel the way I feel, and you are entitled to have your own opinion yourself. That's a great thing about reading, because everybody interprets words differently. And as long as you can get the overall story across, and everybody gets that, that's awesome. The second thing I would like to wish was included with this book was the premise that got me hooked was the expose. The daughter had to write an expose on the mum. And in this book, this expose gets published. I wanted to see the expose written from top to bottom as it was published in the newspaper. I just wish that was just a little bit extra in there for you to be able to read and to come across. Now, you do get bits and pieces as you go along on how the expose is coming along and what's included with it, but I just wish how it was delivered and how people were able to read it character-wise in this book. I just wish me as a reader could have the same opportunity. Now, that's not good or bad. That's just constructive criticism. That's all I wish. Again, you might be completely different, and that's okay. Overall, as I said, it's a great book. It's now sitting next to Marion Keyes on my bookshelf, and it will be a stable where I will actually go back and reread this book. Because my bookcase doesn't have a lot of books on there, but the books on there are books that I will potentially go back and reread because they are stellar. So, go out and find a copy of Summer Island by Kristin Hannah, because I highly recommend going to have a read of this book. If you like this type of book, you may not. That's fine too. But give it a whirl, because I mean, what have you got to lose? All you've lost is time to read 416 pages. Hey, what is time in a scheme of things? And it relates to the book as well. Now, with that review being done of Summer Island, it is now time to find out what our next read is. The next read is brought to you by Fontytees. It's just fonts on teas and more. Grab a new tea today over at Fontytees.com. We can confirm that the next read is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is going to be an interesting novel because I've read the blurb and this is completely different to Summer Island, so we're going into some sci-fi now, and it's going to be interesting to see if everybody who plays along with this podcast, this book club, to see if people actually enjoy this book. Supposedly on Goodreads, it's got a very good rating, so it's going to be an enjoyable book to see. If you're following along at home, you will be able to find our shows available on Spotify and YouTube. Our YouTube account is The Weekend Readers. We're also on Instagram, where we will be updating when the new audio podcast comes out, and also the next reads to read as well. So if you're playing at home, it will allow you some time to actually find the book, go get it, and spend a lazy weekend reading it. The Instagram account is WeekendReadersBookClub. So from us to you, until next episode, bookworms, happy reading.